Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond Day Zero with me, Mark Day. This episode is all about community. I'm talking with Phil Frodsham, who is heavily involved in the Transition Towns movement, and he has great experience in seeing the value of bringing communities together and what can happen when we meet as a community to achieve a common goal. Undoubtedly, it's going to be really important to work as a community to deal with some of the issues that are coming down the line with climate change. It was a really, really good chat. I really loved doing this one. We also reflect on the importance of a connection with nature, and we talk a bit about mental health too. Do let me know what you think. It would be great to get your feedback. You can do that via email, beyonddayzeropodcast@gmail.com. Do follow us on our Beyond Day Zero Facebook page. And if you haven't already, just remember to click on that 5 stars to give us a 5-star rating, and a review would be great. Then more people will find the podcast in the future. Okay, have a listen and tell me what you think. So I'm talking to Phil Frodsham on this episode, and locally you've had quite a lot of involvement. Is it more than 10 years with the organisation called Transition New Mills? Now, I know that some of our listeners will know what Transition Towns movements are, and some will be involved in them, but I guess many won't. So, as a starter, would you like to explain what you've been doing with Transition New Mills and a bit about the wider organisation?
Sure. So, Transition New Mills has been going for a decade, and apparently our anniversary was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, which I didn't realise. So 10 years feels like a very, very long time, and it led me to reflect a little bit on how I joined Transition, because we've now got a new committee. We had our AGM a few weeks ago, and we've got a brand new committee. And I suddenly became aware that I was at that stage myself. I was new to all of this, and I remember 10 years ago not really knowing what Transition was at all, and joining because a friend asked me to join. And I distinctly remember maybe the first 6 months, maybe the first year, maybe beyond that, just sitting in meetings and just thinking, I don't get this at all. I really don't get this. And I didn't get anything about the kind of the group and the aims and how the group worked. And it just seemed so kind of distant to me. And gradually I kind of got into it and read more about it and experienced what we were trying to do, and I still don't consider myself an expert in any of this at all. I still feel kind of quite brand new to it, and I still feel that there's so much to learn and to get involved in and to reflect upon. But it's been interesting. The 10-year anniversary that was a real wow. That seemed just a long period of my life to be doing one thing. So what I found out as I kind of stumbled through my first couple of years of Transition was that Transition was a larger movement. Transition is a response to climate and ecological breakdown. And the kind of ethos behind Transition is that if we act as individuals, it's not sufficient, it's not enough if we're going to tackle the climate emergencies. If we wait for governments to act on our behalf, it will be too late. But potentially, if we act as communities, then somewhere in between the individual and the government, there's a potential there's a possibility that we could make a difference at a local scale. So Transition has always been about a community response to the two major issues that face us as a species, and once you kind of get past that, it then becomes quite interesting. So when we first set Transition New Mills, I said we weren't quite certain about any of this, and we went down many cul-de-sacs. We talked a lot. We didn't quite get what our place was in this, and we felt quite isolated. But we kind of hung in there for as long as we could. We didn't really want to give up on it, and that was important. And it ended up with just the two of us, myself and a colleague called Julian Ashworth. And we came close maybe 5 or 6 years ago to basically calling it a day, because we weren't getting anywhere with it at all.
Okay.
You know, we didn't feel like we were making progress at all. And we even had a conversation about, should we call it a day or what should we do? And we decided to give it 6 more months and see how we felt after 6 months. And it all changed within that 6 months. A couple more people came in, and that allowed us to start working on projects such as kind of an incredible edible project, and we worked on some projects with growing things with local schools, and they were really successful. And all of a sudden, the one project led to another project, and that led to another, and then more people got involved, and it felt better. And then in 2019, I think it was, kind of around the autumn, Extinction Rebellion happened. Greta Thunberg became a person of interest, and the IPCC report came out. And the IPCC report gave us 12 years to make systemic changes to the way that we lived, or we would potentially face catastrophe. And those three things came all in my mind. They came at around the same time as each other. And that really, really changed the way that I and my colleagues and our community looked at this. You know, there was an urgency there. I think when we talked before that about climate breakdown and about ecological breakdown, you know, there was always that kind of feeling that this was a long way off, and we were preparing for this. And, you know, I mean, you know, I've since kind of come to realize that this was a very Western way of looking at this, and that, you know, for lots of countries in the world, climate change was very, very real and has been for a long time. But we were kind of sheltered here. We were sheltered by our privilege. We were sheltered by our geographical location in the world. And so climate change and just seemed distant. And then in 2019, it suddenly felt very real and very urgent. And we started noticing that, you know, the weather just seemed to change around that time. And I think it was 2019 where we had the Toddbrook Reservoir incident.
Yes. So for people that aren't from our area that are listening, you may have heard of Whaley Bridge, because we had a dam that very nearly burst, didn't we?
We did, yeah. And in my town in New Mills, we were downriver from Whaley Bridge. So there was maybe 48, 72 hours when we were, you know, the town was cut off. So the police and the army came, and the railways were closed. You weren't allowed to get the train in and out of New Mills, and no trains went through. And all of our major roads, apart from maybe one or two, were closed. And the whole town was kind of shut off. And it was like that for 5 or 6 days. And that really affected us, because I think for the first time we realized that the weather, we'd had a very, very dry period, and that very, very dry period was ended by maybe 48 hours of just absolute torrential rain, you know. And the problem was the ground was very dry, and the rain just gushed down, and it went into the reservoir, and the reservoir, you know, the reservoir hadn't been maintained as well as it could have been. So you had this kind of twin issue of climate breakdown and a creaking infrastructure. And the two things together kind of put our town, you know, potentially in danger. So all of these things kind of happened, within 6 months of each other, within 6, 7, 8 months of each other. And all of a sudden it felt very real. All of a sudden transition felt very, very now, not something that we would plan for and that we were doing in the future. There was a real urgency to what we were doing. And I think the community responded to that. And all of a sudden the whole project really kind of lifted off within that 6 months. And I think on the back of that, we had this. I'd read that there was a town in Wales, which was Machynlleth, and Machynlleth had got their local council to declare a climate emergency. And I'm a real magpie when it comes to kind of social media and with transit. And I'm one of those people where if I see if I see a town has got something, I want that. I want that here.
Yeah.
And so I remember reading kind of that Machynlleth had got a climate emergency, and I thought, I want that. I want New Mills to declare a climate emergency. So I was absolutely adamant that we would do that here. So we did, and I think it was February of 2000 and I might have got the date slightly wrong here, but it was 2019, and we convinced the town council to declare a climate emergency, and we convinced them by bringing maybe 50, 60 people to the town hall, and it was a very nice, gentle protest. There were lots of families there, and we packed the town hall. I can't remember at any point in all the time I'd lived in New Mills where the town hall was packed like that, and the chamber was packed, and it felt really exciting. And they declared a climate emergency, and again, all of a sudden you start to feel a real momentum. You've gone from kind of Extinction Rebellion to Greta Thunberg, and all of a sudden you're in danger because of Toddbrook. And we've now declared a climate emergency, and it felt like there was momentum behind what we were doing. And we started to create more and more projects within transition, and people started to come to us. And, before long, we've got nearly 1,000 people following us online. When we declared the climate emergency, we made a short video, which we put on Twitter. And we had something like 40,000 people watched it all around the world, and that was really exciting. And again, you start to realise that this is all connected. We're all linked to each other. Technology kind of allows us to kind of be connected in ways that we weren't before, and that was exciting as well.
Yeah, and it sounds very, very much like that was demonstration of the power of communities. That, as you say, was the idea behind transition being in that middle position between government and individuals. So it must have felt like that was just, the ball was really rolling.
Yeah, it did, and that was exactly what we'd always wanted. I mentioned that we'd kind of hung in there with transition, and all of a sudden it felt like it was working, and we were right in the middle of it. And this is why we'd hung in for so many years. We'd gone to meetings, and there'd be two of us there. And I'm sure that anyone who's in a community group has experienced that. And then you go to the next meeting and there's one, and then there's four, and you just think, oh, this is not, And all of a sudden we were in a position that we'd always wanted to be in, which was to start working with the community, and start working together, and start trying to work out how to respond to a climate emergency at a community level. Because we've never done this before. None of us have ever been in this position before. Our species has not been in this position before. So how we do it, I'm not too certain. But with a community response, it's not about kind of how I respond to it. It's about how we respond as a community. And one of the things that you find is that, your community is full of people with really, really useful skills, really, really useful skills that you didn't know. You didn't know these people, and you didn't know, you might have seen them on the train, but you didn't know they had this skill. So again, all the time with transition is how do you bring those skills into the project? How do you kind of create a space that allows people or invites people to share those skills, and people want that. People like that kind of thing. They want to be useful in their communities. People like playing a part in their communities. So this was great. And from the climate emergency, we had a choice, which was we at the time, climate emergencies were often based on a commitment to a zero carbon 2030 or 2040 or 2050, and that was kind of what was happening at the time. And to be honest, with a town council, it's impossible to do that. It's almost not fair to ask your town council to do this, because their powers are so limited and their resources are so limited. And we got the impression that they might have said no to a climate emergency declaration if we'd said by 2040 you need to do this. So what we wanted was a town meeting, and that was all we asked for. We want town meeting. We want the town council to work with the community to set up a town meeting, and they agreed to that. I think that they thought that a town meeting would be maybe a couple of councillors, maybe someone from a local university talking to us, and after a couple of hours we go home, and that's it. That was what the town meeting was.
But you went a bit bigger, didn't you?
Yeah, we kind of had different ideas. Yeah, we had a much more ambitious idea, which was to set up what we referred to as a community conversation, and I believe that, you know, to go right back to basics, it's kind of one of the issues that faces all of us, and one of the things that has gone wrong over the past 30 or 40 years is that many of the connections in communities have been severed. Our politics have severed these connections, and community is different than it used to be. You know, it's not quite as connected as it used to be. So if you believe that these connections have been severed, and I mean, you know, we've severed our connection to our environment, you know, we've severed our connection to our community, to our friends, and we've severed connections to ourselves. So if you accept that as being true, then you understand that one of your roles is to try and reconnect these things again. So how do we reconnect ourselves to the wider world? How do we reconnect ourselves to our community, and how do we connect ourselves to each other? And we wanted to set up a space where we could begin to start kind of bringing these connections back together again. And in our heads, that was a big, open, a safe area where people could come and we could talk about our hopes, our fears, and we could talk about kind of the direction that we really wanted to go in. And that was what the community conversation was. It was an invitation for the people of New Mills to come and really talk about their town and their community. And what do we really want? You know, I've done this exercise a few times now, and I've been involved in other kind of community conversations. And no one ever says we want new car parks. You know, no one ever says we want more pollution. No one ever says we want more aeroplanes. We want a dirtier river. You know, we want our air to be polluted. No one ever says that, ever.
Yeah, let's have more litter in our streets.
Yeah, I would like more litter. You know, I mean, that's what we want, and no one says it. But if we don't do anything, that's what we'll get. You know, we know that if we're passive in this and we sit back, we will get more litter. We will get more pollution. We will get kind of more threats to our diversity. So to us, it was about saying, okay, what do we really want? You know, as a community, can we come together again, not as individuals, not as government, but as a community, and talk about what we really want for our town and what we really want for our community? And that's what we did that day. We had, I think, around 85 people came to the community conversation. And to be frank, I mean, we were astonished. I had a figure of about 30 people in my head. I mean, I presented the whole day, and I thought 30 people, I'll be really happy with that. And we had 85, and it was absolutely wonderful, you know. And we spent 7 hours together, you know. And again, I thought at lunchtime, that's it, you know. Bye. They're not coming back. And everyone came. You know, most people came back because they really enjoyed it, and it was a wonderful day. It was a really, really special day, I think, for all of us. And at the end of it, you know, we kind of shared things. You know, we revealed things. We opened ourselves up. We became vulnerable with each other. We had I think at the beginning of the day, we did a meditation. and there was something like 70 people, kind of
Yeah.
meditating together on what we, and that was fun,
That's amazing, isn't it? Because ordinarily you might come across those people, and it just shows the power of bringing people together in a space where they feel safe and connected around a theme. They all realize the importance of what they're there for that day, and everyone naturally is quite happy to join in with the meditation, which perhaps in some other situations people, it's funny, isn't it, people like it, perhaps that's as you described it, having a severed connection to yourself. Some people might not even admit that that's something that they might quite like to do, or might not even realize they might want to give it a go. So it's powerful stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's this idea of, we're all in our tribes, we're all part of different tribes, and you go online, you go on social media, and wow, you see people that are friends, but they're on different tribes, and they'll tear each other to pieces, and you go on social media, and it's a world full of just hatred and kind of division, and we're all against everything. It's awful. But then you bring people together in real life, and that just melts away.
It's a really important point, that, isn't it? It's a really important point regarding that division, that polarization that social media has driven. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that. It really has. That here's a point to be debated, and you're either yes or no, and argue the toss, and you just feel like you forget that you've got much more in common with the person that you're arguing with than that which divides you.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, out of the community. I mean, it's one of the things as a community response. I know it's kind of something that we often repeat, that we've got more in common than divides us, and it becomes a bit of a cliche. But I genuinely believe that. I believe that deep down we might argue about Brexit, or we might have argued about Brexit. We might argue about politics. We might argue about all sorts of things. We might not see eye to eye about these things, but when you're in a community, we all care about our local river. We all care about air quality. We all care about the way our streets look. And all of a sudden, the differences disappear, because community is at the heart of everything that we do. And all of a sudden you realize there's so much common ground there. It's all there if you look, and we tend to do this thing where you talk to someone and you might agree with 80% of what they say, but there's 20% you don't, and I'm not talking to you again because I don't,
Yeah.
And with community, I think once you start looking at community, you work the other way around, where this person might have politics that are the complete opposite of mine, but they want to help me clean the river. Well, that feels like a connection point to me. That feels like something to build on. I'm not there to change that person's mind, and they're not there to change mine, but we're there because, in the Venn diagram, there's a bit in the middle, which is community. And you realize that that's a really exciting space for us to be in, to leave, to try and leave politics behind, to leave our tribes behind, and to attend as ourselves, as our true selves. And again, that our community conversation, I think, was that space where we could reveal who we actually were and what we actually cared about. So it was great, and we created a book, and at the end of the day, we created a book called New Mills 2030. It was this giant kind of hastily put together book at the end of the day. And the important thing about the community conversation was that everything that everybody wrote down was included in that book, and that was really deliberate, because we wanted to hear from every single person that was there. Every single voice was valid and was important, and that was reflected in the fact that even if you wrote a post-it note and just scribbled your name on it, it went in the book. So no one went away thinking, I wasn't heard then. No one listened to me. Everyone was as important as everybody else, and we all contributed to this book. And it was a wonderful moment, and we kind of left the town hall. This was just before lockdown, so about 3 weeks before lockdown, we left the town hall, and we kind of thought, yeah, we can do all this, and this is fantastic. And then I mean, we knew what was around the corner. You know, we all knew, but we were in that denial space of, oh, it might miss us. But
yeah,
that you know, COVID was round the corner, and we kind of thought, you know, we might be okay. It might not be that. And then obviously 3 weeks later, we went into lockdown, and that was it. And we've, you know, in real life, we've hardly seen each other since in 14, 15 months, you know, since we had our community conversation. And that has been difficult. And all of a sudden, you know, the trajectory that we kind of set out changed quite dramatically. And the ideas that we had of how we were going to implement this, again, just changed beyond all recognition. And the world was a different place within 2 or 3 weeks, and still remains a different place than it was then.
So given that high that you were on, you know, in your community, there was that real impetus. There was that, you know, you'd had that discussion and you were ready to go forward with it. How does that sit with you personally now? The fact that, okay, we've had 15 months or whatever. Does it feel? Are you itching to get going again with that? Do you think that we're, because of the community support aspects of the last 15 months, particularly in the first lockdown, do you think that has further strengthened your local community? And how does it, you know, is it immensely disappointing that we've gone through that to you personally, or how does it sit with you?
I mean, the first thing to say about the pandemic is it has been horrific, you know, and it has affected every single person, you know, in a really negative way. I mean, it's been absolutely awful. You know, we're still not out of the woods yet. So that's the first thing to say, is that everybody has lost something over the past 14 or 15 months. And it has been something that I would not like to go through again. But, you know, we're able to hold, things can be good and bad at the same time. And again, it's this either or thinking. It's not all bad and it's not all good. So you have to, there's an important lesson with climate breakdown, I think, that COVID has shown us, which is that things, you know, at some point in the future, things will get very difficult for us as a species. You know, I don't think there's any doubt that you know, I really can't see us heading this off. You know, even if we stop now, even if we stopped all carbon and, you know, we've still got really, really difficult times ahead of us, because climate change is real and it's active and it is affecting our lives now. But there's something really important about COVID, which is that even if you think really dark thoughts about what climate breakdown and what, you know, ecological breakdown may look like and what they may feel like, we've still got to live our lives in a meaningful way. We've still got to connect to each other. We've still got to love, and we've still got to care. And those things will continue. You know, COVID has been horrendous, but at the same time, there has been so much kind of generosity, and there has been, you know, so much connectedness, even though we've been apart from each other. And there's been so much, you know, there has been really positive things about it. And as people, you know, we have to hold both of them at the same time. Things can be really awful, but, you know, at the same time, there can be chinks of light that can sustain us. And that's really, it's an important lesson. It's a really, really important lesson, is that life will continue somehow. You know, we will find a way to live, and we will find a way to live through this. So COVID, you know, I remember the first few weeks, the first few months of COVID, of walking and going out on my, you know, my 2 hours daily exercise and exploring New Mills and surrounding areas. And it was very quiet, and I mean, very, very quiet. And it was incredible, because there was an awakening in me that I didn't, you know, something awakened that I didn't realize was there. And I look back now, and I wrote about this recently, and just said that, you know, particularly the first few disorientating months of the pandemic, when it was really, really, really terrifying, you know, and really, really disorientating, I look back now and I think, will the sky ever be as blue again as it was in those first few months? I mean, there was no aeroplanes in the sky. And we had that beautiful spring, and I would look up and the sky was a shade of blue that I'd never seen before, because it was just clear skies.
Yeah.
Will we ever hear birdsong as clear and as loud as we did during kind of April and May and June of 2020? Will we ever connect to our local community in a way that we did around then? So, these are things that we need to keep hold of, because it's those types of things that when things start to get dark, and, COVID isn't going to be the only problem that we face. The next one will happen. And again, we need to remember the lessons that we learned from COVID, that life will continue and beauty will still be there. And we need to seek out this. And that is why we do all of this, because of that beauty.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel in some ways I was surprised, but not surprised is the best way to put it. Surprised by the response from people in supporting their neighbours and looking out for each other. And I think because I probably have experienced, not necessarily where I live now, but when I lived on a modern estate before and had very little to do with my neighbours. It was very much, you see your neighbours coming into the house. When you're going out of the house, you say hello. And there wasn't really any great sense of connection between us. And it felt like, as you say, we sort of lived in little silos, smaller groups, family groups almost, which would be very, very different than it had been, for our ancestors and how we evolved. And it was therefore, it was a nice surprise that something within us that's always there was reawakened, and we reached out and we offered help. We gave ourselves freely to others. And it gives me, whilst, as you're saying, it's horrifying about what we might have to deal with. And obviously some people already are. But there's real hope there that that's our default state, and it's masked by our lives currently. Our day-to-day lives kind of just hide that away from us and from other people. So I feel the same. And how personally do you hold those two opposites together? The kind of, I'm not saying you've got the answer and you got it right. I don't think any of us have. But what helps you to find the right balance?
Yeah, balance is a good word, I think. And over the past, I'd probably say 5 or 6 years, and maybe beyond, I've kind of had difficulties with mental health, and I've kind of gone through kind of quite severe depression on a number of occasions, and I've been troubled with anxiety, and again, life, it's what our life does to us. It puts so much pressure and strain on us that in the end, we can only take so more. So balance is a big thing for me in my life. How do you get that balance right? And I think for a lot, myself and also a lot of other people, we started to find a bit more balance in our lives during the pandemic. And we started to say, well, hang on, I don't want to go to the office. I don't want to travel for 3 hours a day. I want to work at home. I mean, not everyone was in a position, and not everyone was privileged enough to be in that position. But for a lot of people, they started to realize that I'd like to spend more time with my family. I'd like to spend, more time around my house and around my community. And I was kind of one of those people. So I kind of, I'm very fortunate that I live in a really beautiful part of the world. And within 10 minutes, I'm in, moorland, beautiful, beautiful moorland that's quiet and peaceful. So I spent a lot of early lockdown coming out of my house, turning left, 10 minutes up the road, and that was it. It was me, and it was lapwings and curlews and skylarks, and that was it. And that was, that was an incredibly special time for me. And that brought me a lot of peace. And it was very strange because I very, very distinctly remember kind of, one afternoon or one early evening, going out, and the sun and the sky was clear, and I was immersed in this kind of bird song, and people were dying, within a mile or two from us, and that was hard. That was really difficult to reconcile the two of them, to get that kind of, on one hand you've got this kind of beauty, and on the other hand you've got this awful kind of terror. So, but it was important for me to kind of find that balance, and to find time for myself, and to do the things that kind of appealed to me. So birdsong was a big thing for me at that time, and I went out and I recorded a lot of birdsong, and I still got those recordings, and they're really special to me. And I cycled a lot, and I it was a peaceful time. Bearing in mind what was going on just around the corner or just over the hill. So I do that, and I also I meditate. I try and meditate every day. I'm not always successful, but I've kind of, it's important for me to just spend some time tending to myself and tending to my mental health, because I work full time, and then I do transition on top of that, and sometimes that feels like a second job. It really does at times, and that you suddenly realize you're working so many hours a week. So you do need to really look after yourself, and you do really need to connect to yourself and do whatever you need to do. And, I write music. My life is pretty full of things, but a lot of that is doing the things that nourish me, that allow me to thrive. So, and I still don't get the balance right. I still overdo it sometimes, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. I used to say yes to everything, and I kind of pick and choose a little bit now, and I'm fine about that. I don't have this guilt of I should have done that. I'm quite happy to say no. I would like to do that, but I can't do that. Simple. So it was an I think a lot of people learnt those lessons as well. A lot of people who were working awful hours and fitting as much as they can into their lives, suddenly over the past 14 months said, well, hang on a minute, I quite like the solace, I quite like the quiet. I quite like to just retreat a little bit from all of this. And that, again, that is something that I think for a lot of people, they will always, we will take that with us in our journeys for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, there's something in that, isn't there? Something we kind of reattached to something very important. And I think, a lot of people have. It's interesting because I kind of have a fear that we'll let go of that a bit again. And I guess that'll happen to some extent, but I think a lot more people have recognized the true value of certain things in their life, and how superficial some of the other things are. You mentioned nature and music. Tell us a little bit about your music, because nature inspires the music you create.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I've always been into music in a massive, horrible, geeky, all-consuming kind of way. I would have music when I was a teen. I used to listen to music all day, and then when I went to sleep, I'd have music on all night.
What sort of music were you listening to then?
At the time, it was things like Joy Division, and it was the Smiths, and I was also, I'm at that age where I was very, very fortunate that I went through the whole dance thing in the late 80s, and kind of, I was at a really good age. I was kind of 17, 18 when the whole thing in the late 80s was happening. So all of rave culture, I kind of took most of that in, and really, really thoroughly enjoyed all of that. I was always into hip hop, like massively into hip hop. An awful lot of a very wide spread of music. And I mentioned a little bit earlier about kind of going through depressions and anxieties, and there were many, there are many awful things about those two kind of conditions. But one of the things that I found really difficult was I used to get anxiety attacks if music was very urgent. So if the drums were really loud, or it would set me off. I mean, it was so bad. And around the time that I kind of started to have kind of panic attacks, and around that time, I mean, my father died around that time, and so all this was kind of mixed up, and he left me some money, not a huge amount of money, you know, he was quite a modest person who lived quite a modest life, but he left me some money, and the deal was always, you know, do something with it that you've always wanted to do. You know, don't go on holiday, don't spend it on new shoes, or don't get the house, you know, kind of have something that will always be there. And I mentioned I was always into music. I was in some pretty awful bands when I was a teenager, but I kind of, you know, life got in the way, university, kind of work, kind of, and all of a sudden, you know, I kind of really regretted the fact that I didn't continue in the bands that I was in. You know, they kind of fell apart, and it was one of my big regrets was, if only we'd really stuck at that, I reckon we would have been all right, you know.
Yeah.
Never did it. So when my father died and I was left some money, I suddenly thought, why don't I build a music studio, you know, from scratch in my house? You know, why not?
Why
so
not?
I did. Yeah, I did. And I bought everything. I'd never played any of this. I used to play the bass. That was it, right? And all of a sudden I bought a music studio, a fairly modest one, and I bought all this equipment, and I thought, that's what I'm going to do. This is it. This is fantastic. I've always wanted to do it. Let's get back into music again. And of course, I bought kind of synthesizers and drum machines and sequencers, and I didn't even know how to plug it in. You know, I mean, I couldn't. They sat in the box. I got them out of the box and said, great, and put them back in. And for about 6 months, they sat there, and I was so I didn't even know what to do. I didn't even know kind of what to do. I didn't know anything about MIDI. And I realized at that point that the task I'd taken on was the equivalent of learning the violin, the guitar, the drums, the oboe, you know, all at the same time. Yeah. And I realized that that's what I'd done. And I thought, oh God. So gradually it took me a few years to kind of get my head around all of this. But all of a sudden I had a music studio that I knew how to use. And it was incredible. You know, I mean, I've always been a creative person. And this was my dream come true. This is something I've always wanted, and you know, and I'm sitting in it now. So at the beginning, I struggled a little bit. I wasn't quite certain what I wanted to do. So I'd make, you know, one type of record. Then it was very much, you know, it was like a chameleon at work. It was all over the place. And then gradually, I suddenly started listening to a lot of quieter music. I suddenly started listening to kind of ambient and neoclassical. And I realized that this is what I wanted to do. And I said, my anxiety had stopped me from, you know, I couldn't even turn my drum machine on.
I was just going to say the same. I bet that meant the drum machine was a non-stop.
Well, I had 3 drum machines, and I sold them all. And I've got no drum machines in my studio now. And so I started to make quiet, slow music, all samples and synthesizers, and then gradually I started to become inspired by the sounds that I heard around me, particularly the sounds of nature and of land and of water and of air, and it just very, very gradually started to kind of make sense to me. So I would go out and I'd record field recordings of kind of, you know, local areas, and then I would come back and I would use that inspiration of the field recording to start writing music, and it was great. You know, it was really it just that kind of realization that this is what I wanted to do. And I don't know, part of it, you know, it's to do with my response to climate breakdown. You know, it's to do with my response to ecological breakdown. It's me kind of, it almost feels like me having a conversation with, you know, the world that I share with other non-humans. And so it's about me understanding the world around me. And, you know, it's about, you know, me understanding myself as well, and my relationship to the world around me. You know, where do I stand? So I like to make these kind of what I refer to as like little postcards of, you know, little vignettes of, you know, of a certain period of my life, a certain location. And that really inspires me now. And that, you know, it feels like, you know, that is my calling, you know, after 40 odd years of being into music and all of a sudden I've kind of settled on, yeah, this makes sense now. You know, this really makes sense. And it is very, very autobiographical. I used to many years ago, I used to be a filmmaker, and I went to art school and I studied film, and I never quite connected with it until I realized that it was autobiographical. And as soon as I realized that everything that you do is autobiographical, film made sense. I'm not sure why it took me so long to realize that music was the same as well, and it had to be intensely personal, but it did, and I do that now. And when I started writing music, my kind of, I had a goal, and one of my goals was to sell one piece of music. You know, the capitalist in me kicked in, and I wanted to sell. I wasn't interested whether people liked it. I just wanted to sell one piece.
Doesn't sound too unreasonable.
Yeah. Just one piece, and I did, and I put some stuff on Bandcamp, and one person liked it, and I was just, you know, I was overjoyed. It meant so much that someone else had liked a piece of music, and that they had wanted to buy that piece of music, and I've done okay since that. I mean, I'm not going to make a living out of this unless something just suddenly clicks.
Yeah.
But you know, I find it enjoyable. I find it really enjoyable to kind of stretch myself a little bit and put stuff out there, and then people like it, and it just, you know, I don't do ego very well at all, but every now and again, you know, someone's bought one of my albums, and that will do me. That sustains me for a little bit. That does. So yeah, I do like my music, and I would like to spend a lot more time doing it if I could.
Yeah, you sent me a link with where some of your music is hosted, and I didn't know what sort of music I was going to be listening to, and it's lovely, Phil. I really, really enjoy it. It's really atmospheric, very evocative of, you know, without knowing your personal deep connection with those places. It is, I mean, obviously, I guess I'm surrounded by the same sort of landscapes as you are. Yeah, it's very atmospheric, just very, like you say, ambient. Yeah, in fact, I'll put it in the show notes, but mention it. Tell people now where to find it.
Yeah, so you've got to be careful here, because so the and I'll tell you why. I decided to call myself the Deccan Traps, and I really like the name. It sounds like a mod band, you know. It sounds like the Deccan Traps are a mod band from the 60s and 70s. They were probably in Quadrophenia or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, they probably got a credit somewhere in Quadrophenia. They appeared in on the cafe scenes, you know, the Deccan Traps, and basically they're a mountain range in India, and I don't know which one it was, but one of the 6 extinctions or the 5 extinctions was caused by. There was one of the causes was a chain reaction of this massive range of mountains, and there was a volcanic eruption, and then the whole lot went off, and it just caused kind of, you know, absolute kind of, you know, misery for the whole planet, and the carbon came and dreadful stuff. But I really like the name, and again, it kind of felt it was linked to extinction, and I kind of, you know, that felt right. It felt, yeah, that seems okay. So my band are called, are called the Deccan Traps, and you can find them on Bandcamp. But, and this is where the story gets a bit strange, there is now another band called the Deccan Traps.
Who'd have thought it?
I know. And they're a kind of rocky band. They're from the northwest of England, so they're not that far away. But so I don't know what happens now. I don't know, you know, if there's any legal advisors out there who can kind of give me some advice. I don't know whether we go to court for months on end, and you know, it's like I don't know if it's like Kramer versus Kramer or something now, and that, you know, for the next 10 years we're battling over this name, or whether we just kind of, you know, we just forget about it. But I would like to keep the name. and I had it first as well, and they stole it off me.
Yeah.
So I'm staying put, basically.
Yeah. I recommend people having a listen to that. It's, I mean, it's clear that you're, from the things you've mentioned, the connection to all sorts of ways is really, really important to you. Through how you live, through your music, through communities, and I really admire. You said you were a bit like a magpie at the start. I really admire that. Not only that ability to grab things that you see from elsewhere, but to kind of gather people around you and speak in such a way to others that it inspires them to join in the collective conversations. It's clearly really important for the challenges that we're going to be and are facing in the future. It's great. It's great stuff. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover about like the work that you're doing with transition, or where we're going next, or just have a right good moan about the structures that we have in place at the minute that we ought to be tearing down, and future possibilities?
I think community work is difficult. I don't know how the last 40 or 50 minutes has come across, but it's really difficult. This is not easy work at all. And I find that frustrating at times. But we've spent a long time, believing the myth that we're separated from each other. We've spent a long time, we go to the cinema and superhero films are about one person saving the world on their own. Hooray, we love it. And I sit there thinking, oh, this is not great. This is not a great. So we live, a lot of people live kind of in their little silo. They believe that they need to work on their own. They need, it's to do with work. It's to do with insecurity. You have to show your own personal kind of strength, and so there's a lot of really bad habits that people have picked up over their lives. It may be all they've ever known. You've got to prove yourself.
Yeah.
And then you start working together, and you see these habits all the time, and I've probably got them as well. I'm not kind of exempt from any of this. I've been brought up in exactly the same system as everybody else. And that is frustrating, to kind of, but understandable. It's a real challenge to get people to work together. So it's hard, and all the time you're trying to break. I mentioned the previous. I mentioned COVID, and I mentioned connections, and I mentioned the community conversation and Toddbrook, and all the time you're hoping that you start to break away at. You start to chip away at this kind of individualism. This kind of toxic individualism that we all hold. And all the time you're trying to get people to invite them to work together and to connect, and it's hard. I mentioned about kind of having a job and then doing transition on top of it, and you see people falling away all the time. You see people burning out all the time, and that's kind of one of the things that I would love us all to do this as a day job. I would love us to get paid for this. I'd love us to have more time, so that we're not, we're responding to the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced and possibly ever will face, and we're doing it part-time for free. And that is just, you can really let that get you down if you're not careful, because it doesn't seem sufficient. And I used to, this idea of finding peace and about finding balance, I used to go to bed every night and think, it's not enough. This is not enough. No matter what we do, it's not enough. And then I kind of realized, no, it's fine. I've got to do what I can do. I can only do what I can do. I can't stretch myself any further, So that I find that really difficult. I find it difficult that on the shoulders of a relatively small group of people still, that we're trying to change so much, and we need to, we had 100, we had 90 people at our community conversation, and I would like next time for there to be 500. and then to be 1,000, because then we really start to make changes then. And, we realize at the moment we're still a very small minority in this, but, maybe things are changing. I don't know, maybe COVID has kind of gave us a glimpse, a possibility of what could be and what our lives could be. Again, to go back, I would hope that we could have these realizations without there being mortal danger hanging over our heads. I said this about Toddbrook. Wouldn't it be great if all the things that we did, if we didn't have 500 million tons of water kind of hanging over us? It'd be great if we could do this without a pandemic. So that's the next challenge: is how do we take the things that we've learned from COVID and from Toddbrook and from other incidents, and how do we do that but in our own time, in our own place?
I wonder if the evaluation that we've all gone through to a greater or lesser degree with COVID, I wonder when we get past let's say past the summer, when everyone's run around, hey, we're free, if that happens. Some people, I can understand. And partly it's about regaining a sense of connection to people that you haven't seen for a while, but perhaps in ways that are facilitated by our capitalist culture rather than a deep connection with those people. But I wonder whether after a little while it's all going to start feeling very shallow. That we'll go, okay, well, that was it. And now what? And we might have a bit of an existential crisis on our hands, because we'll then be tuning back into, we'll then realize that we've got a hell of a problem to fix, and where do we go now? And perhaps that's the point where we can get together in numbers and build a bigger movement. Perhaps there is an opportunity coming. That's a hope. Maybe I'm clinging to that hope, but. Yeah, I get the point. I just think that perhaps there is a real learning from this experience, and perhaps it will be the basis of what brings us together in the future. But yeah, because we've got so much to change.
We have, and it's about reminding ourselves, and again, it's about reminding ourselves of what we hold dear and what we held dear during COVID, and it's about telling stories, and it's about creating narratives. And we know, one of the things that we've learned over the past, few years, few decades, facts and figures don't work. So when people say to me, the Greenland ice cap lost 400 million tons of ice, I've got no idea what that means. My brain I can't envisage what that looks like. I've got no idea at all. And because I can't cope with it, it washes over me, and facts and figures don't work. So how can we create new stories? How can we create new narratives about the way we live? And that's one of the things that, it's one of the things that I really enjoy doing is how can we use Toddbrook? How can we use COVID? How can we use art and music and connection? And how can we weave a narrative all the way through that, so that people can empathize with it, and people can see that it's actually quite a positive vision, and that seems to me the most important role in everything that we do is to weave those narratives and start connecting those narratives, and to create an alternative, because the narrative is that at the moment it goes right the way back to Thatcher and saying there's no such thing as society, and that story has done so much damage. That narrative has done so much damage to the way that we live. And of course, it wasn't just that as an isolated incident. It was the way that the media responded to that. It was the way that politicians responded to it. It was the way that we responded to it, and we kind of believed it. We kind of believed it became quite an enticing kind of thing to go out and conquer the world on our own. And we've got to create an alternative narrative, and a narrative that as I said, that connects us, that shows us the humanity of us all. A narrative that is generous, a narrative that is caring, and that, I think that's our task, is to draw all this together with these kind of more positive visions. And And transition is very good at doing that. Transition is very good at kind of, there's a whole issue of what if questions. And so there's provocations of what if we did this another way? What if, you talk about transition, but in New Mills at the moment, we've got a project called Home Farm New Mills. And that kind of came about this idea of what if New Mills became a farm? And so, I could give you facts and figures about nutrition and about food security and prices, and it doesn't really mean much. But if I say to you, what if your hometown became a farm? And straight away, you start having a picture of what that would look like. Wow, that's quite interesting. That's an interesting idea. What if New Mills became a farm? What if we were all farmers? What if we all started to create our own food or produce our own food? How would that look? How would it feel like? And all of a sudden, the facts and figures and stats don't matter, because you create a narrative, and sometimes a what if question can be the framing of that narrative. And you suddenly go, that's really exciting, because you're creating an idea. In the same way that Thatcher created an idea that was really negative, we've got the power to create ideas that can really, inspire people to make it happen. I mean, Rob Hopkins talks, and Rob Hopkins is the person who kind of helped found the transition movement. And one of the things that really resonates that he talks about is that in I can't remember what year we went to the moon. 69 was it?
Yeah.
But he said we'd already been there hundreds of times. And he said Tintin had already been to the moon. Frank Sinatra had been to the moon.
Yeah.
Musicians had been, in other words, we'd imagined what it was like to go to the moon for decades before. And all of a sudden we had no choice. We literally, there were so many ideas about going to the moon that as a species, we had no choice but to go to the moon. We couldn't not go to the moon, because we created a yearning to go to the moon. And our narratives and our songs and our films and the stories we told each other and the jokes we told meant that we had no choice but to do it. We had to do it. And I'm hoping that in New Mills and in all other towns that we can create visions and narratives, and we can do that through art, and we can do it through music, and we can do it through conversation, and we can use all these kind of tools that we have at our disposal to create a future that we have absolutely no choice but to build, because it is so incredible. And Home Farm is one of those projects that really excites me, because it gives a vision of what the town could be, of everybody growing food as a collective together. And the project at the moment is we're going to grow wheat in the town. So 300 people are growing wheat on small patches, not one big farm, but small 1 meter patches of land in your garden, down the side of your house, on some wasteland. We're growing wheat. And then once we've grown the wheat, we will learn together how to turn that wheat into flour. We will mill that flour, and then we will learn how to bake bread together. And then at the end of it, we will break bread and we will have a harvest festival. And then we do it next year, we do it next year, and it becomes part of what we do. And then next year, we might also say, okay, why don't we grow hops? Why don't we all grow hops? And then we'll create our own beer, and then we will drink our own beer. And wow, isn't this great? And you start to see how this kind of works together. And you start to see how working together and being creative. And we've not even mentioned nutrition or stats about food security or prices, not even part of the equation. We don't talk about that because it's not what moves people. What moves people are exciting ideas that they feel they can be part of. And it kind of feels like that is what we're trying to do in transition, to create pop-up tomorrows. These are all tiny versions of what tomorrow could be, whether it's a repair cafe or whether it's people sharing food together or whether we're growing together. And so out at Home Farm, people suddenly become inspired. And we found out a couple of weeks ago, we've got a local wool shop, and the local wool shop had this idea of, why don't we grow flax? I'm going to give out flax seeds, and we grow our own clothes. So in 2021 we grow wheat, and in 2022 we grow our own clothes. And you suddenly think, wow, this is brilliant. This is really exciting, and we're on the cusp of something really, really interesting. And we just have to keep going with this now. And, the potential is there for us to create something really spectacular. And again, if we can do it in New Mills, then any town can do it. I think New Mills is a very special place, but everyone who lives everywhere else think that knows that their town is special. So if we can do it, other towns can do it. And you start to see how this kind of works and how it builds and how it may potentially create the future that we're all yearning for.
Yeah, superb. That's really great. It's really inspirational, and I know that there'll be a lot in that conversation that will really hook people in and hopefully plug people into some of those ideas and get them involved. I think it's it's the sort of thing that we need to be thinking about as we're coming out of this terrible period that we've been in. And I think it's been a brilliant conversation, Phil. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Really enjoyed it. And I'm sure, and it feels like there's so much more that we could have got into as well. So I hope we get another chance to do it as well.
Yeah, give me a shout. I quite like talking. So, as you may have noticed, I'm not really a shy person, but yeah, it's interesting. And it really, without going off on a big kind of tangent again, it does help to kind of talk about this because it settles things in your mind. And sometimes you make connections in your mind that you didn't realize were there, and you only get that from talking. And over the past 12 months, we've not done a great deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Cheers. So I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I enjoyed recording it and chatting with Phil. As I said, it was really, really good. I really got into stuff that I liked to chat about. So, 2 questions for you. Do you know anybody who would like to listen to my podcast? If so, grab the link, share it with them, and hopefully they'll tune in soon and catch up on all the back catalogues. If you haven't heard the previous episodes, then we've got conversations about mental health, we've got the future of transport and sustainable delivery. Last week's episode was a brilliant one about rewilding, and we've got some great guests coming soon. And that's the other question. Do you know anybody who you think would be a really good guest for the future? If so, drop me an email. The email address is beyonddayzeropodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening. See you next time.